Hey, this is Meg Riley in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you've joined us for another episode of The VUU. Let's start by having our regulars say hello.
Hi, I'm Joanna Fontaine Crawford, and I am here in Austin, Texas.
I'm Hank Peirce, and I'm speaking to you from lovely Medford, Massachusetts.
And I'm Tom Schade, and I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan. How are you all?
You can hear us! Yay!
Bob LaVallee. My headphones just totally blew up my system here, and they worked otherwise. But
I know. Tom, we apologize for live, folks. We were a few minutes late because poor Tom was bouncing on and off trying to get here. And we'll be talking with our special guest, Emily Rosenzweig. Did I say that right? Rosenzweig?
Yep.
Okay, great. We'll be talking
First
to her.
time, too.
Excellent. We'll be talking to her later about Happy the app, which is going to be a fun conversation. But first, I just thought I'd check in and see what's going on. Joanna, your folks are at it again there in Texas. I'm sorry, but they are.
Days without Texas embarrassing me, 0. And we're not even in legislative session. Like, they're not supposed to have any power to do evil right now, but, you know, that doesn't stop them. Yes, Texas joined several other states in filing a lawsuit, I guess, about against the federal government, saying, no, we do not want to have to be nice to transgender children, and we're not gonna. So yeah, that's what's happening in my neck of the woods.
what happened to Meg? Huh?
Oh.
And Meg's gone.
I saw. Have you been involved in those Spectra protests, Hank?
Hank?
I guess not. No, I haven't. No, I've just been busy doing other stuff. But seeing a lot of our colleagues who have been out protesting a natural gas pipeline that's been trying to that a Pennsylvania company or a gas company would bring from fracking fields in Pennsylvania into the Boston area through a number of residential areas, and folks have been protesting this for the last year and a bit now, and yesterday was another day when a number of ministerial colleagues of ours were arrested in protesting this thing, but I haven't been a part of that. I'm fine. I'm just sort of wrapping up my time in Milton. I'm doing a quick segue here. Wrapping up my time in Milton, which has been great. They have called Lisa Ward to be their next minister, and she'll be starting in August. So I'm just getting my ducks in order and giving them their final marching orders before I leave and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, life is good. Life is good right now.
Yeah, everything's the same here. I mean, today I'm in Ann Arbor. Last week I was in Cleveland, and my personal life is bouncing around a lot, just like my internet connection. So, so I will spare you all the details of my adventures in the real estate market these days. But
Well, let's hope Google's good with me now. They suddenly wanted a password. God only knows. So my adventure this morning is that 2 guys came around with CenturyLink shirts on and clipboards and told me that fiber optics had come to my neighborhood, and I got so excited and I ordered it, and they said, with it I could also get this Prism TV, but it would cost the same as my DSL now, and I signed up for it, and the guy came this morning and said, I'm here to install your Prism TV, and I said, that's fine, I don't really care about that, I'm just really excited about the fiber optics. And he said, oh, there's no fiber optics in your neighborhood. And I said, wait a minute, 2 guys came around, they had all my account information, they had CenturyLink shirts and clipboards. He said, they don't work for CenturyLink, they're sales guys. And I said, excuse me, how did they have my account information if they don't work for CenturyLink? He said, CenturyLink hires them. And so of course, I canceled my thing immediately. I don't need Prism TV, and and I called his boss, the tech director, who said, these guys have been doing this for 10 months. The tech department spends their whole day talking to angry people like me who are canceling their accounts when they learn that they've been lied to, and they can't get the people at CenturyLink to even care that this is happening. So I just decided I'm going to use every social media possible to be trashing CenturyLink right now. Not the poor tech people who are just trying to do their job and were at least honest, But, you know, these liars, I mean, my God. So, I mean, it was a no-fault cancellation, but really, how stupid. And I did all these different things. I missed something on Saturday because I got talking to them. I rearranged my days. Blah, blah, blah. They don't care. So, anyway, that's my tale of woe today, life in capitalist society. But I'm angry. I'm really angry. And I'm going to get on my neighborhood listserv and blast them up the wazoo so no one else falls for this.
Get on Twitter. I mean,
definitely.
Yeah, I think Twitter is the most effective.
Yeah, I joined Twitter just for this. They say one tweet is worth 600 letters to a company because it's public, and I have, a lot of followers. So anyway, blah, blah. My little rant of the morning. Hank, you're having choppy. It's just not a good tech day. So what else is going on? Bob, you've been doing some faith work there in Buffalo around racism. How's that going?
We had a great. It was an amazing thing. This past Saturday, we had our first in Buffalo, Surge Buffalo, faith and race anti-racism convening. And like so much else about Surge in Buffalo, we're sort of making it up as we go along. But we had 26 folks come out on a beautiful afternoon in Buffalo with only 2 weeks' notice, and I thought that alone was a Christmas miracle. And we spent a lot of time talking about the intersections of what our theological grounding is, and how we could fight racism in Buffalo. We practiced some deep canvas type techniques, not quite exactly the same thing, but about how to talk to people who are not in the same place we are. And then it was really, really encouraging and exciting. And I think people of faith have special resources and opportunities in doing this anti-racism work, and so we're really excited to engage them. It was about a third UUs, a third Catholic, and a third Presbyterian, with a handful of evangelical types, new evangelicals, like urban evangelicals, thrown in. So, really exciting group.
Oh, that's really cool. That's great. Surge, as for folks who don't remember, we had Aaron from Showing Up for Racial Justice, which is really organizing white folks to act. And I'm engaged here in Minneapolis with it. We are going up tomorrow to St. Cloud, Minnesota, where there is a Christian minister touring with rabid Islamophobia. I mean, just saying Muslims want to kill your grandchildren. I mean, like literally saying things like that. And so it's really interesting. We were asked by the people in St. Cloud, which is a pretty small town, to come up there. And so we're working to not be the big city takeover people, but to be supportive. And it'll be really interesting. I've never gone to another smaller place from here, but it feels good to lend some of our passion and skills and all of that. So it's something I'm doing this week.
Not to derail things, but it raises such an interesting thing about how Surge works. I've done a lot of different advocacy, but I've never seen such self-awareness and intention around how to interact with other groups and how to be respectful and collaborate in a truly faithful way rather than just self-promotion.
Right.
It's really
that had better be central when white people are working on racism. If that's not at the center, we're in deep trouble, right? So, yeah. Well, today we have, and I'm really excited, and when I left, I lost all of my chat, so I've lost the careful.
I can introduce myself.
I think I'll ask our guest to introduce herself, and then I'll say a little bit about why I was excited to invite her on this morning. So, Emily.
Hi, my name is Emily Rosenzweig. I am a co-founder of a new app called Happy, and I'm also a professor of marketing at Tulane University in New Orleans. Though right now, actually, I'm not that far from you, Bob, because I'm in Ithaca, New York, or just outside. So, but yes, nice to meet you all.
So I probably know the street you're on.
So I got an email from one of the colleagues of Emily's working on this app and had a conversation with him. His mother is UU, and that's how he happened to call me. And I was really interested in the premise of this app and what it has to say about what church means and what community means and what pastoral care means in this time. So Emily, I will let you describe the app rather than me doing a secondhand version of that, and then we will talk about some of the research that led you to think it's important. That's also research that we're a little obsessed with in the church world. And so tell us, how did you come to create this app, and start with what is the app?
So basically the app is, and it's under development now, we're in sort of very initial stages, but we're hoping to have something that people can download in probably August, is an app that's going to provide access to emotional support on demand from a real live human being, basically whenever people need it. So access to affirmation, encouragement, comfort, validation, motivation, basically at the push of a button with a real life person who's been vetted and has demonstrated that they're good at doing that. They're a compassionate listener who has skills at providing that kind of, those emotional resources. So that's sort of the basic idea.
And that was actually part of Jeremy's interest, he thought people like his mother, a retired UU, would be great at this. Yep. And he thought from knowing her that UUs would have a natural ability to do this kind of support for people who called. And I was thinking, there are a lot of homebound CLF members, for instance, who could use a little bit of income. So as I understand it, it's like a pay-for-service kind of thing, right? So I'm really curious what kind of research makes you think, so what kind of research made you think this was an important app to develop, first of all?
So, I mean, there's a ton of research suggesting that, well, first of all, there's like epidemic levels of loneliness and social isolation as well as of stress. And both of those have been linked to like a whole litany of health conditions. The medical community sees social isolation as being just about as deadly as diabetes. So I think there's that side of thing, that there's, I think, clearly a real need in that sense. And then there's a lot of research suggesting that genuine human connection is like sort of the most powerful source of human happiness, right? We're an ultra-social species. There's really no substitute for another human being's attention and care and listening and compassion. So I think, those things together suggested, hey, there's a real need, and that I think there's reason to believe that it doesn't have to come from someone that you know well. And we've all had the experience of talking to a bartender, talking to someone next to us on the airplane, talking to people that we don't know, that actually sometimes can be even more helpful because we feel a little bit freer sharing some things with a stranger than we might with people that we engage with every day.
And so, I mean, obviously people have done this for sex for quite a while with paying money and calling, but I'm really curious whether there's research to show that people would do this for loneliness. I mean, I'm trying to think how it would be to make that call and to say, yeah, I'm going to pay, $7 to get some support now or something like that? Is it by the minute, or how does it work?
It'll be prorated, so yeah, it'll be by the minute for as long as you want. So it could be you're coming home from work, you've had a difficult day, you don't want to go home and dump all of that on your spouse right away. You talk to someone for 10 or 15 minutes just to sort of get it off your chest, get heard, and then go home and are in a better position to care for your kids and engage with your family. Or it could be, I want to spend an hour on the weekend really talking through something. I don't feel like I have enough support, or my friends and family have already heard me talk about these issues so much, I don't feel comfortable, going back to them again. But I think, to your point of whether or not this is something that people will pay for, I think it's a really important question, and I think we see that it's going to be, meaningful work to change the conversation around what it means to seek support. Right now, people go out for a drink after work, no problem. There's no stigma associated with that. There's no stigma associated with getting yourself a massage or going for a pedicure or doing some retail therapy, right? But we want to sort of treat talking to a compassionate listener like a treat that you give to yourself, something that boosts you up, that helps you going when you're sort of struggling a little bit, but that is sort of normal part of sort of self-care and something that you would do to support yourself.
So the people who will be answering the calls, is it mostly just listening, or are they going to give advice?
So it's mostly listening, unless someone is specifically listening and validation, right, and support, unless someone asks specifically for advice. And so we will, we'll be providing some training. We think that there are people that really have a natural aptitude at this, and we're sort of seeking those people out. But what I would say is that we don't want this to be an advice service unless that's what people want, right? Because I think that often happens when we share issues, is that rather than listen and support, we get, well, why don't you do this and why don't you do that? And so we definitely want to avoid that. Ooh. Now I can't hear you guys.
Well, because we're not saying anything.
Okay.
That was silence.
Panic.
Yeah, we're the only TV video show that believes in the power of silence, which other people call dead air, but occasionally we lapse into that. So don't worry about it. But it's, feel validated by it, okay?
I think we were all absorbing that. Tom, were you about to say something?
Well, what I was thinking about, this is just random, but, there's a lot of people who call psychic lines,
Yeah.
which I think are exactly the same thing, except, dressed with a little thing, a little, woo-woo stuff, but, basically, a psychic line is someone who has the skills to listen to what you're saying and validate what you're saying, basically. They have that touch, that gift,
And I think part of what we're finding makes a big difference. We've been doing pilot calls, so we've been basically providing a service for free as sort of a proof of concept of, does this actually help people? We do a pre and a post survey. How are you feeling before and after? And showing really exciting results. So, I mean, like 90% of the people that have called feel better after the call than they did before. We see an average of like a 30% increase on sort of the scale that we use of how happy they felt before to after. And really, I think 85 or 86% of people saying they want to use this again regularly, they would want to do this. But sort of to your point, I think one of the things that has made these calls so powerful is the listening, and also the sort of valid, people are calling in, they're struggling with divorce, they're struggling with family members that are ill, a whole range of issues. And one thing we try to do is sort of help them see strengths in themselves that are allowing them to persevere and get through this. In that way, I sort of think of my husband's a social worker, and I think of it a little bit sort of as having the social work model of building on people's strengths. But I think when you're in these situations, we do so little validating of each other on our day-to-day lives, right? If you think about most people's work life, how often do people really get validated for what they're bringing to the table? And, I think the same, unfortunately, in people's home lives. So I think just the idea that there's someone who can recognize strengths in you and remind you of them is just a really powerful thing.
I was thinking of that Beacon book about the lonely American from a few years ago, written by two psychologists who said that they had surveyed people, and in like 1980, the average person said they had 2 people that they could talk to about what mattered most to them. And when they redid it in, I can't remember, like 2000, 25% of the people said there was no one. And that wasn't even like who you could share like secrets with. It was just who you could talk to about what's important to you. I think those are statistics that we as ministers take really seriously. And of course, we hope that our congregations are happy, the church, but they're not always.
I had a conversation just yesterday morning with someone. It was walk to school day here in Medford, and we always walk to school anyway. But I was talking to another parent who's part of a Medford Walks program, and he was saying how he had just finished reading one study about folks. One of the reasons why folks who were planning to commit suicide didn't, and one of the things was that someone waved and said hi to them that morning, whom they didn't even really know, but just something as simple as that, like someone recognized me, and that was enough for me to say, hey, I'm not invisible. I'm making I'm doing something here.
Yeah, there's actually good research on that. A friend of mine, Jillian Sandstrom, has work on the power of weak social ties. So exactly that. The people you just see in passing, the supermarket checkout person that you see every time, and that has a really sort of powerful ability to make people happier on a sort of a daily level. So I
saw a study of libraries that if a librarian just touches someone as they check out, they tend to say they like that library like exponentially more. So, and of course, everybody's being warned not to touch anyone, right? I mean, even young kids, no one's supposed to touch them anymore. So, yeah, it's really.
It's interesting to me, in that I've had this experience of moving into a new community the last couple of years, and then moving again into a new community, and now I'm moving into another new community, and the difference it made when I was finally recognized in a store. When I lived someplace and in a restaurant, made a huge difference in how I felt about where I was living. I go back to those places all the time now because somebody recognized me. That
we all want to go where somebody knows where everybody knows our name.
Right, I know. It's one of the things about I did my CPE in a hospital, of course, and a lot of the work was validating, where people were at and what they were feeling, etc. But I always felt that one of the reasons why the validation worked is that people didn't assume I was going to give it to them. That in fact there was a kind of there was a little bit of a contradiction in the sense that I walk in as the chaplain and they actually expect me to be judgmental. Right, because of everything that they project onto ministry. They expect me to be judgmental, and then when I'm not, when I validate where they're at, that's such a, it really counts. It really counts. In a way that if I walked in with the big, I'm a resident validator, and what you say I will validate.
Well,
it's
I mean,
expectation.
I take your point, but I guess, and I can see that what in psychology we call the expectancy violation might essentially amplify that effect. But I think if we think about like our own set of friends, right? I know that if I'm having a hard day, I know which friends I call, and they're not the people that it's going to be a surprise if they make me feel better. Right? So and in fact, I think probably a lot of us who actually have extended social networks, even know it's like, okay, there's the friend that I call when I need encouragement to persevere with my research. And then there's the friend that I call when I'm just like, I'm really down about a relationship, right? And that we know, and we turn to people specifically for the types of resources that they can provide us. So I don't doubt that there is an extra punch of like, wow, I thought I was going to get judged and I didn't. But I don't think you need that in order to benefit.
Yeah, I'm not, arguing that, that you should have a judgment app, or call up.
I'd like judgment, please.
Wait, that's the Calvinist app. I like it.
Yeah, the Calvin app.
Well, actually, you could have a
damnation. Why not a damnation app? You're going to hell. You're going to hell.
Press 2 for tough criticism from a friend.
I can completely understand the need to have a safe place where you can talk about something that's going on in your life, where you don't have to be protective of the other person. And I'm thinking my experience was I have a daughter who was very sick, and I did it through blogging anonymously, but I needed a place where I didn't have to say, oh, it's okay, where I could just really let the awful come out. But I do want to ask about this. On the other side, often we don't want to go into conflict when we should, with our child or our husband or whatever. Is there any kind of coaching that the person on the other end of the phone would be doing in terms of, if someone just calls and is, oh, my boss did this, the other person saying something like, well, have you talked to your boss about this? Are you set up for anything like that?
So what I would say is that we don't plan on setting lots of, we don't want it to be sort of a mechanical service, right? And so we don't plan on strictly conscribing the providers to a script. right? That's sort of antithetical to what we're going for. And so I have no doubt that there will be people who do a little of that coaching when the person seems receptive to it. And it's sort of along the lines of advice giving, where it's like, okay, does it seem like they'd be receptive? Is there another perspective they could take, right, that might be helpful? And actually the perspective taking is interesting because in our pilot we ask people sort of what button they would push, right? What would they be looking for? And, you know, we have things like compassion, empathy, etc. And about 50% of the people, and they could push multiple, but about 50% of the people push perspective. That they're looking for just someone to help, right? You get so stuck in your own way of seeing a situation, and maybe your friends and family have been stuck there with you, and you just want someone to give you some perspective. And I actually took a call like this where it was someone who was going through a career change, trying to figure out what her next move should be. Should she settle for a job that she doesn't love? Should she keep going? And she just really wanted an outsider's perspective, and she told me that. And so I was able to do that for her.
Mm-hmm. How do you find people to be the listeners?
Actually, so that part has been easier than even we had hoped it would be, at least initially. So we started out with just a message to one of our co-founders is part of, I guess what you'd call sort of like a creative persons Facebook group, people that are sort of involved in creative enterprises broadly, mostly women. And she posted a message to this Facebook group basically saying, we're looking for compassionate listeners who would potentially want to earn income in this meaningful way. And it's very flexible, etc. And basically it's just been a snowball effect of those people interviewed. They told their friends about it. We've actually we had originally hoped to recruit 100. That would be sort of our initial base for when we launch in August or September formally, and we're well over 100 now with people continuing to come in. So that part has been very encouraging. I think because also if you think about like the sort of the gig economy, right, and what that offers to people, like, you know, this is just a much more meaningful and substantive type of part than is available in many cases, right? And so I think the prospect of doing something where I could work part-time on my own schedule, like literally log in when I have an extra couple of hours, the prospect of doing that and having the work actually feel like I'm helping someone, I think is pretty powerful to people.
Mm-hmm. And how do you know that the person who volunteered is going to be good at this and not meeting their own needs first?
Yeah, so initially, our first step is that we do a phone interview with people, and we do a little bit of role playing and get a gauge for them sort of right off the bat. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately when the system is live, what will happen is in addition to that phone interview, our callers will rate their providers, and anyone that basically doesn't maintain a certain rating won't be allowed to continue. So essentially our callers will vet people for us in the long term, in addition to this initial screening.
And you aren't really interested in training people to do this. You're looking for the people who already do this well and then move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in part because I don't think we want it to feel super scripted, right? We want to access people's natural resources.
Mm-hmm. It is very interesting to, I think it's very interesting to clergy, because clergy are in this position where we're trying to roll out and expand our ability to be, pastoral care, or at least pastoral, friendship inside our churches, and we're trying to recruit lay people to do that which we often ends up on the minister's desk or on the minister's phone line. To do that, and we get, a lot of it goes into training, supervising, etc., lay ministers, we're calling them. And but you're saying don't bother with that, just look for people who naturally do it well.
So there's different let's see, the best way to describe this. I think there is value in training and in supervising and in shepherding, 100%. I don't think that as a service we're likely to be able to provide that. So it's not that in theory I don't see the value in that, but there's a whole bunch of reasons not probably worth getting into why I don't think we're likely to be able to provide that, and that's part of why we're looking for people who don't need a lot of it. But that's not to say that even people who are naturally good can't benefit from all the expertise that you guys have, right? Which is, you know, basically all of you started out naturally good at this and then got a ton of training, right? So it's...
Oh, I'm not so sure about that.
No.
That was the thing
I'm not so sure on either of those propositions.
But I will say,
your goodwill.
Tom talked about his about the clinical pastoral education experience that all of us who are on the ministry path have done. Where we, you know, and are you familiar with it, Emily?
Not specifically to UU. So I'm broadly familiar, but not with the UU path.
Well, it's standard. It's standard across denominations. It's an external organization that authorizes it, but you know, you go and do one unit is 3 months full time where you're in a hospital or some other kind of setting, spending, you know, maybe 60% of your time doing pastoral care and 30% or 40% in reflection. But the thing is, like, everybody starts as a beginner. Most people start as a very beginner, and they throw you right in. Well, I don't know about other programs, but my program was like, you know, that first week we were walking the floors in the wards and walking into patients' bedrooms or, you know, rooms and pretending to be ministers, and it was you know, it was a learning by doing kind of thing. But like most of the time, it's terrifying to be the person walking in the room, but it's actually okay. Like showing up is enough.
And I mean, the first call I took, you know, I think I sort of played this role with a lot of my friends, so it wasn't that I didn't have any experience with this, but I remember the first call I took with a stranger, I for sure was like what do I do? What do I say? And then, you know, very quickly it felt normal. So I think it's true that there is, for people who have some aptitude for this, I think there's a little bit of like, once you get into it, if you have these reserves of compassion, they come out, right? And they're triggered by talking to people who are really in need and are not being supported. I mean, that's the other thing is, you know, the people I've talked to, it's not hard to be affirming and supportive because it's like, wow, these are people going through really hard things basically alone, right? And so that really triggers compassion. It's not hard to muster it for people in these situations.
I was going to say, if you don't mind, the stuff about the clinical pastoral education part, though, is that you also went back to both the group and a supervisor to sort of say, how did I do? Did this, you know, did I do something stupid? And also there was a sense of also making sure that if I did do something stupid, that either I would go back and speak to the people, or that the supervisor would step in. What sort of checks and balances do you have to make sure that folks who are volunteering to talk to folks aren't being manipulative and aren't like getting people's credit card numbers or whatever, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so I think this is a really important point, and you know, we've actually mostly been focused on the legal side of handling suicide prevention. We're going to have essentially a panic button which will allow people to be transferred, people in extreme distress, that listeners fear are suicidal, to be transferred to a suicide hotline. Mm-hmm. But you raised actually a really good point that we haven't, I think, discussed in great detail yet. Obviously, there'll be a system for reporting someone. If you think someone is a problem provider, there'll be a system for reporting them and having them removed. But you know, I think longer term we'll need to figure out strategies to deal with the potential for sort of more subtle forms of manipulation. And it's a really good point, and we'll have to sort of figure out what the best way to minimize those risks are. And you know, yes, with the hope, yes, that's the best that I can say.
Yeah, because there's a part of me that also sort of felt like, oh, it's in some ways it's the gig economy of like it's the Uber counselor, you know, and the Uber driver counselor. Like you could actually do both. Hang on, like that could be something too. Like they pick you up at your house, talk to you. Yeah. You know, and then bring you to the bar. But it's the difference between like a taxi driver who's like taking tests and had people and they have their license on the police have their license on record and stuff, opposed to an Uber driver. And so it really is that like struggling with the I think with everybody, institutionalism and authenticity are so important for folks today, and being able to find and to find the help, and as opposed to having to call your health insurance, I would like to see someone. Why? And then all that sort of stuff. Going just pressing the button, calling is a big difference. Yeah.
I mean, to me, actually, because we've had discussions of like, oh, is this a threat to therapists? And I actually think it's a compliment, in the sense that, to me, what I would love is if Happy can change the culture and make talking to a stranger more normative and more acceptable, then wow, that would be fantastic. That people who actually need the help and the longer term sort of sustained work that a therapist can do with them would be more likely to try that. So I really sort of see this as sort of hopefully a bridge to therapy for some people, rather than in any way as a substitute. Rather than as a substitute for it.
Do the people answering the phones fall under being mandated reporters?
That's really an interesting question. Mandated reporters of crimes?
Or I've been, abusing my child, or I'm going to commit suicide, or, any of those.
Suicide people. Yeah, so the suicide piece, we definitely are going to have a structure in place, but that's a really excellent question, and I'm happy that Jeremy is a lawyer, in addition to having a background in psychology. That's a great question. I don't think that we've talked that through yet, and we will need to. It's a really good point.
And Bob, I think you had a question from one of our viewers.
Yeah, our beloved congregant Ann Burns was asking, our staff, volunteers are paid, required to have liability insurance?
Staff as in the call, I'm assuming meaning as in the people that are receiving the calls?
Yeah, I think
so. Right now, Jeremy is talking through with a lot of lawyers, basically around what kind of terms and services, like conditions of service, are we going to build in. We're really taking this from the position that, especially to the extent that we market this as not an alternative to therapy, but as a sort of basic human, conversation with another human being, at least I think from our initial perspective, just like if you talk to someone on the plane and they say something that doesn't make you feel good, like that person doesn't need liability insurance for having talked to you. That's, the broad perspective that we're taking, is that this is sort of just facilitating conversations from one regular human being to another. Mm-hmm. But that's not to say that we are for sure working on how can we set up the expectations and the way that we market this, as well as how can we set up the legal protections for the people on both ends.
Yeah, I think part of what was intriguing to me about this is that, I've been, a number of us have spent time with this online congregation where people don't phone, but they come to talk to each other. We have a group called Coffee Hour, which is just where people can talk about whatever they want. And it takes a lot of moderation, because people communicate really differently from each other, and what's hypersensitive to one person, another person would never know. Now that's different because a lot of people can respond to a comment. It's not just one deep listener.
And I do think the online component, I think, makes it a little bit different. I think there's more, I think there's a little bit more risk of that online, where it's harder to read people's tone, where it's just, where you're not getting the feedback in someone's voice and sort of being able to adjust to that. So that is, I think, part of where the power of a live human being comes in.
It is, and because I run this kind of congregation, I do counseling on the phone with people who, I'm not a therapist, but I do pastoral counseling, and it's very different not to have the body language. Yes, I have the voice, but I can't see the person, and a huge amount of what I learn from people is in their body language. Like even doing this is so different to me than talking on the phone to someone. I spend my life in these video calls, because seeing each other, sometimes someone doesn't say anything, but you see their face shut down. Or so, especially with silence, I think on the phone a silence is really hard to know, whereas in person you can know they're thinking, they're crying, they're whatever they are. So it's going to take. I mean, I'm really intrigued by this because I think our competition, if you'll put it in those words, in the congregations increasingly is things like Meetup and apps and 30-second meditations and that people, the time that it takes to put into actually building a community of people who actually know you and support you from knowing you. And they're both important. I mean, sometimes there's no one like a stranger to just say the right thing. But yeah, I think I just found this really intriguing. That was why I was like, you should come and we should talk to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think, like just looking on the Church Larger Fellowships, the site, right, if you, like the community covenant, right, a lot of those same basic principles, respect, tolerance, compassion, confidentiality, right, are all basically the parts of the things like that we sort of see, we'd like to see sort of borne out in this app. So I think what you guys are doing is really, in a lot of ways, sort of providing some of this for people who maybe, have looked for a church community in their local area and haven't found one that's a good fit, or, whatever. So, we totally support the existence of sort of longer, more sustained communities. And actually, one of the things that we have planned for the app, probably not the sort of initial launch version, but a little bit down, is that you'll be able to favorite a provider. And if that provider, you'll be able to favorite a provider, you'll be able to get notifications when that provider is online. And then if basically once you favorited someone, your calls, if you put in a call, it'll get automatically routed to one of your favorites if they're available. So I think there's a little bit of room for building up that sense of comfort and trust with a specific person, not in the sense of like I make an appointment with them, but in the sense that like over time there's a network of people that I trust and I can talk to sort of repeatedly.
When I was, go ahead, Joanna.
Are there any plans for integrating something like FaceTime or Skype, or is the anonymity just a crucial part of this?
I think from our conversations, we feel like the anonymity matters a lot. And there's actually a lot of research on just how much judgment comes in once you look at someone in a way that I don't think I would want on either end, right? Like the callers judging listeners, or givers judging receivers, and vice versa. So I think for us, the lack of a face is actually kind of lack of a face sounds strange, but the lack of looking at someone is actually, I think, pretty important.
It's like talking to your brother in the dark,
I think, any of us who are parents know how many of the critical conversations happen when the kid's in the car, not looking at us, and younger in the back seat, looking at the back of our head. So often that's what comes up. I've obviously been paying a lot of attention to ways that people support each other remotely. And when I was looking for Happy, the app. There are a number of apps that look like Happy. The same kind of name. One of them is basically a therapist on call. It really is licensed therapist, and you can pay, it's like $500 a month. You can call anytime you want to talk to a therapist. And there's always a therapist who will, it's really expensive, but compared to going to therapy for 15 hours, it's not, And so I was really looking at the kind of smorgasbord of opportunities that people have to talk. At the same time, I met somebody a few years ago developing an app for college students who were suicidal because colleges didn't want to hear about it because of liability. Colleges did not want to know, so they would get these calls, and they wouldn't know where the people were, but the colleges wouldn't want them to call them and say there's a suicidal student at your college because they didn't want to know. And I think, I feel this at CLF too, we're in this weird litigious world where, Margot Adler, the wonderful witch, got sued by somebody who tripped and fell in a spiral dance and spent years of her life dealing with this lawsuit of somebody who tripped, and held her responsible because she had the spiral dance. So I think caring, and I just was talking to somebody yesterday, teen suicide, where they had tried and tried to get services, and no one would see this kid for a really long time, and they finally got in, and and what they say is, go to the ER, just go to the ER. That's what you need to do. And if you're a parent with a suicidal kid, that's not necessarily what you want to do, because that's basically breaking a huge trust. But this poor kid, that the parents got in finally 1 week before he just said, that's enough, I can't do it. And so I see such pain and such need, and social isolation is part of it, and so are many, many other things. But I guess what I'm just trying to say is the systems are so broken that here we are coming up with apps and duct tape to splice together human caring in it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I totally agree, and I think, there's so many reasons for why communities are more dispersed, why they're weaker than they were. And I think, part of the way that we think about happy is if you think about like the spectrum of mental health from like a -10 suicidal to a +10 like blissed out constantly, right? Like most of the services that are out there are really aimed at like the -5 to -10 range, which I mean, and even services for those people are not great. They're not great, but what's out there is mostly aimed at that group. And we sort of feel like there's the +5 to -5 range, the big middle, where there's just really room for people to be better supported, to help both prevent them from going down the spectrum, and to give them potentially the resources to be better partners, to be better spouses and parents to other people in their lives, that they can have these sort of spillover effects. So I think in some ways we sort of see ourselves as sort of like a first-line preventative piece to try to keep people from going into these regions where they're really in dire need and then face the prospect of our terrible mental health system.
One of the things Jeremy mentioned is that the caller, the people who receive the calls, also feel much better after the calls.
Yeah, I mean, it's for sure tiring, but it's profound, and you just feel like I've actually contributed in some meaningful way, right? So it's like, I can have a bad day with my research and like nothing's going right and I'm never going to be published, and then I talk to someone and I'm like, I actually like made this person's life better today in some meaningful way. So yeah, I think it is a powerful experience for the people on the giving end.
That makes sense. Yeah, we can testify to that for sure. And it's actually interesting because it does remind me. I'm a lot of my ministry specifically focused on serving veterans, and especially from the Iraq-Afghanistan era, and it's the isolation that is part of the reason why 22 vets kill themselves a day in this country. And so I'm thinking about like, how would this work as a peer support model? Because again, like it's sometimes people folks come back and they need a mission, and so being a good listener, there's always like we call it the warrior's oath, where you swear an oath not to kill yourself about reaching out to somebody else and that sort of thing. So this would be a really interesting tool, or I don't know if you've thought about targeted subsets of populations that you might want to work with, but it's
actually, so military veterans was one of the first groups of people that we talked. That actually, I wasn't even involved at this point. That Jeremy talked to someone who works with sort of veteran services, and I think he really sort of reaffirmed what you're suggesting, that there's a real need there in the veterans community. I do think there are sort of specific things about the veterans community that, I think that before people sought help and used the app, they might feel like they wanted to be on the giving side of giving it to others, right? Just to this point of having a mission, and that giving it to someone else would help sort of justify or make it more okay to use it. And, I do think that we see people as being able to go back and forth in the service, that you don't have to be just one. You can be a caller and a provider. You'll have the option to go back and forth, but of course not everyone who needs the service is going to be great at doing the providing.
Yeah, there's the rub, right?
So, but I can imagine in some some future where, this is wildly successful, having sort of like a sub app for military veterans, because I'm also would imagine that the communication style that people are comfortable with might be different as well, right? That there are people who may not be comfortable being validated in the same way that people who haven't gone through military. I don't know, but
one of the stories military folks tell themselves that's terribly isolating is that no one can understand what I'm going through, except somebody else who was like right there with me, which is just not true, but it's not there.
So I for sure think we see military veterans as an audience that could use the service. I think it's going to be a challenge to actually get them to uptake it, but I think it could be a meaningful benefit to that group.
Now, the technology of this thing is basically people, listeners sign in, right, and make themselves available, and that list is somewhere, in a switch, and calls come in, and they get automatically routed through some algorithm to a listener, right?
Yep.
None of that is new technology.
No.
New, right?
No.
Actually, basically, you're like, as Meg said, your 1-900, sex talk things have been using this for.
I hope not, but yes, the broader point is true.
As a technology, and so I want, just Meg, what would it cost for CLF to set this up among its own members? I mean, that kind of technical, matching up callers and
I would say a lot. So we have a full-time developer, like an experienced developer working on this full-time. He's been working on it full-time for many months now, and we still have months to go. So it's not it is not new technology, but it's not an easy tech. It's not a
off-the-shelf kind of.
It's not an off-the-shelf product.
It's not a platform you can buy, huh?
No, if only we would have done that and launched it months ago. But no, so there's quite a bit that goes into the sort of construction of the back end, even though that technology is not like brand new. And basically, it's going to be using like a voice over internet process to route people.
And you monetize this by charging the caller.
Yep, and then basically we take, essentially in the way that Uber does or Airbnb does, we take some percentage and essentially the caller pays, we take our percentage, and then the rest goes to the provider.
Okay, all right, okay. All this kind of, this is the boring stuff, right?
Yeah, it's really actually very interesting to me, but I'm like that, So, this is expected to go live in August, you said? Is that what
our goal is to have something that people can download August, September, right? So something that you could go to the App Store and download. And where we're at right now is we're actually still recruiting pilot callers. So if anyone's out there and wants to try this service, right now it's free.
To call in is free right now?
Yep, to call in is free.
Okay.
We don't have the app version, so essentially if you go to our website, which is happytheapp.online, there's basically, you can see there'll be a give happy, get happy. So if you want to get happy, you go through it, and then you basically click to schedule a call, and there's a calendar, and you say, here's when I want someone to call me.
Interesting.
So that's basically our setup, our back of the envelope setup at the moment. And then for Give Happy, for people who are interested in being listeners, we're still basically doing these phone interviews. You can click on that to schedule an interview. And then basically those people we'll sort of be updating them with our progress, and then when things launch, we'll be letting people know, hey, now's the time where there's a live app, you can register to be a provider.
That's great. Are you doing, I just wondered this, are the providers going to do any kind of peer support for each other in a Facebook group or anything like that?
Yeah, so we've gotten, a lot of our initial recruitment has come through these sort of social networks that, like right now, there have been a big group of people in LA and a big group of people in New York. And so we're actually planning some summer events where we get those people together, because I think the people that have wanted to be providers are just really excited about the mission. Like, we've just gotten such a positive response to the mission that I do think that there is room for a community of people who say, hey, we're in this together, we value this. And so, yes, we're planning events, and I think longer term, there will probably be other online communities that facilitate that as well.
That's cool. So listeners, if you or someone you know might like to be the uber happy person, you can check this out. And meanwhile, if you just want to try it out and see what it's like, I'm gonna do that sometime. We
would love it. You know, part of what we're collecting right now is essentially sort of proof of concept data that we'll be taking when we reach out this summer to investors. And so we love having callers because that's basically what allows us to show, hey, this is something that's valuable for people.
Well, thanks so much for being with us, Emily. This has been really interesting and fun.
I'm really grateful to get to talk to you guys, and now I'm going to be a follower of your regular hangout. So it's just really interesting to hear.
Yeah, it's fun. Well, next week we have Scotty McLennan, also known as the Doonesbury Chaplain. He's most famous because the chaplain in Doonesbury, if you're old enough to know that comic strip, was based on him. But he is going to be talking about his new book, Christ for Unitarian Universalists. Christ, you guys, not Jesus. So if you have time to look at this before next week, I commend it to you. Otherwise, we'll see you then, and we'll learn about it from him. Have a great week.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.